there. So this is my CS50C final project, which is focused on genetic privacy and the genomic company 23andMe. And this company, 23andMe, it essentially takes genetic material. You can send in genetic material to them, usually through spitting in a tube. And people literally have, back then, what they call spit parties, and send it to the company, and they would figure out their DNA relatives and their family tree. So I think before we get started, it is very important to understand scams. I think today we've kind of become desensitized to scams. We give all kinds of information out that we don't need to, and we see results such as like in the top left here from the Ford Motor Company. Obviously, that's supposed to be the Ford Motor Company, but I think we're all used to this literacy where there's misspellings and incorrections, and we don't really take it seriously. I think that we should, because imagine the scenario that we had your credit card company sends you a notification on your phone and saying that you have like all these transactions that came out of your bank account, which you didn't do, and like your heart sinks, your stomach kind of churns a bit there, like, oh no, what's going on here? And luckily, all you got to do in most cases is call your credit card company. And most of the times you just like say, hey, I think there's fraud going on in my credit card, and they'll cancel it for you. And in most cases, they'll even refund you what was spent on the card. And see, that was the old solution I'll allude to here, is you cancel the card, reverse the changes, and get a new number. But what happens if your DNA was stolen? What happens if that happens? You can't cancel your DNA, can't get replacement DNA. This is what happened to nearly 7 million people in October 23 with 23andMe when their genetic material was stolen. And so let's get an idea of the timeline of the breach. So it started in April of 2023 and it ended in October of 2023. So in April of 2023 was the beginning of the credential stuffing attacks. And essentially what a credential stuffing attack is you can imagine like a digital locksmith trying to pick a lock. So he has multiple keys. And what these keys can allude to is like multiple passwords. Like he has like a bank or a library of passwords, and he's trying to get into this lock. So he keeps using key after key after key, and he'll eventually get into the lock. And the lock is your account or your password. So he guesses it correctly because he's using a library. And so they get into a few accounts here on the 23andMe website. And there's a guy who goes by pseudonym Golem on breach form. So Golem is the actual adversary, the main bad actor here, who has stolen nearly 300 terabytes of 23andMe data, and he brags about this on the breach forums. And what is breach forums? You can almost think of it as like a subreddit for malicious hackers, and what they do is they brag about what they've stolen, or they get ideas and tips from other hackers on how to breach and steal other information. And what you'll see here that's kind of interesting, Golem has actually told everybody on breach forums about this. He's bragging about this, but 23andMe still has not found out that they've been hacked. And so in September, the company finally becomes aware that they've been hacked, and they offer to provide $30 million and 3 years worth of security monitoring. But they've still not released to the public until 2023. Or in October 2023, they finally report the breach to the general public. And so this is like a cascading vulnerability. So what do I mean by that? First, important to understand the percentage of attacks that are credential stuffing attacks. So about 0.1 to 2% of accounts are susceptible to credential stuffing attacks. And so this is simply mostly people who might have passwords that aren't very good, or they might use the same password for multiple accounts. And so what happened was that about 2,800, as you can see in the bottom here, 2,800 accounts were affected by a credential stuffing attack. That's only 0.2% of the accounts. But you'll see in the yellow here on this donut chart that nearly 6,900,000 accounts were affected by this vulnerability. And why is that? Well, 23andMe had this feature, two features actually, one called DNA relatives and the other called family tree. And people who opted into this shared their DNA relatives and their family tree to other accounts. So the accounts that had been stolen through credential stuffing were at least in some way related to these other affected accounts. It became like a snowball effect where the affected accounts were actually having information leaked because they were associated with the credential stuffing accounts. And here is just a little bit better representation of what happened. This is how a single breach becomes millions. In this case, about 2,800 breaches become about nearly 7 million. So as you see in the top here, this yellow represents an account that was hacked by credential stuffing. And just for the sake of simplicity, let's just say this circle here marked with a D and this circle right here marked with F have the same great-great-grandparents. D is simply the accounts that have opted in with DNA relatives, and then the F is the ones that have opted in with family tree feature. You can actually opt into both, but say they have the same great-great-grandparents. So in that case, there's a family tree there and actually a DNA relative. So those accounts are actually being leaked information because they're associated with the credential stuffing account. And you can just imagine the second tier of accounts, because this one's associated with the first tier of account, which is associated with the account that's hacked by credential stuffing. So they all have a link here. And so because of that, there is information that's being leaked, and the adversary now has access to all of these accounts, or at least all the information. In this example, one account was hacked, and it actually led into a total of 7 accounts that had leaked information. So what was the information that was actually exposed? So there was names and profile photos, there was birth years and locations, family surnames, grandparents' birthplaces, and detailed ethnicity estimates. As you can see here, there is a lot of information that was exposed and actually could do damage to people. And what's interesting, and actually 23andMe did not disclose this until much, much later, but the adversaries had focused a lot more of their efforts and attention on Jews and people who were of Chinese descent. So what happened? What was the aftermath of this? Well, actually 23andMe shifted the blame of their breaches on the customer. And they said that it was the customer's fault because they had bad passwords. I find this unacceptable, because it was really easy for the company to do something like 2FA or two-factor authentication, or to tell their customers what kind of passwords they should put in. Because I'm sure many of you are aware, whenever you try to log in or you try to create an account, I'm sure as many of you are aware, whenever you try to make an account, it gives you directions on like how many characters or alphanumerals or special characters that you should have in your password. And I think this should have already been in place along with the two-factor authentication. And I don't think it's right to blame the customer for this. And also, they actually failed to address the vulnerability. They left the issue unfixed actually for a very, very long time. And their approach to fixing it, in quotes, was pretty much what I said, a band-aid to make two-factor authentication and tell customers to change their password. So people who were opted in to the family feature or family tree and the DNA relatives features were still actually susceptible having their information leaked. And then they also updated terms of service to avoid liability. I find that the reason why they did this, obviously, so they couldn't be sued. I find this scary because there is a law or regulation out called HIPAA, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And what that's supposed to do essentially is to protect customers or protect people and secure their information. But 23andMe was actually in a gray area where HIPAA couldn't help customers, and they were also trying to avoid liability. So if you had your information stolen, you were essentially just going to be completely out of luck. And Golem, the person who stole this, and all the other adversaries would simply have your information and can do as they please with it. And then there's also data retention issues for the aftermath. And what I mean by this is people try to contact 23andMe and say, hey, I want to delete my information, and rightfully so, because it had been given to the wrong people. And 23andMe essentially said that your information cannot be deleted because we cannot associate you or your account with your DNA. So essentially, whenever you provide it your spit, in a tube and gave it to 23andMe, that information or went to a database and was not associated with your account anymore. And that might seem like a good thing, right? Because now they can't associate which DNA's whose. And if like law enforcement or some bad actor were to come in, they couldn't really find out from the database whose DNA's who. But oddly enough, the Golden State Killer was actually identified from the databases of DNA from 23andMe. So how can both be true? And so there are potential risk of having your genetic data exposed. And so one is targeting phishing attacks. So imagine you go on Facebook and you click on an ad for Amazon.com. Well, obviously, Amazon.com should be Amazon.com, right? But you don't look too hard at it. It looks like Amazon.com. You click on it and it sends you to a page that looks just like Amazon. And you don't check the URL and it says Amazon.com. But you don't see that. And so you try to make an order. You complete the order and you hit order now. Well, you have actually been hacked, or at least your information has been stolen because that was not Amazon.com. And that is something that could happen by having your DNA exposed. They could do the same thing by actually targeting you based on certain health predispositions or race or from where you're from or from your grandparents or anything. And so there could be insurance discrimination based on genetics. So maybe you might have an insurance company deny you because of your genetics, and maybe you're more susceptible to heart disease or cancers, or maybe your grandfather smoked and he got lung cancer, and now they see that in their genetic profile and they decline you. And there's also enhanced identity theft using comprehensive genetic profiles, as well as blackmail by health predispositions of unknown family connections. And then finally, another potential risk would be long-term vulnerability to you and your family members, because they can use your genetic material, your DNA at any point against you to deny, for example, like again, the health care coverage, targeting phishing attacks, even blackmail you. So what can you do about this? Well, first, obviously create unique, strong passwords for every single account. I know many of us are guilty of this, that we do not create strong passwords for every account. We often reuse the same password for every single account. So what can you do about this? So one thing you can do is use a password manager to handle complexity. And so one that I like to use is Bitwarden. So you can use one strong password to access your password manager, and it'll store all of your passwords for you, easy to keep up with, and you can have multiple strong passwords. It'll even generate strong, powerful passwords for you, so you don't have to keep up with them anymore, and you'll be safe and secure, and you'll have different passwords for each and every account that you use. Another thing is use two-factor authentication. Those are simply those one-time passwords that you often will get from your phone, like a text message or a notification or email, or even sometimes a phone call. And there's just a password. You have like a very short period of time and you need to put it in, and it will eventually expire. But it's just another layer of security that you can use. Another is consider using disposable email addresses. There's many 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute email addresses online that you can use. So maybe you want to create an account for a website, and maybe you're not for sure if it's authentic or not. So consider using a disposable email address from one of these sites. And actually, many of them you don't have to create an account. You don't have to sign up. You just automatically, immediately get a disposable email address, so you can sign in to that website, use the email address. You can even use like a fake name, and you can find out if there's a bad website. Well, not really much was lost because they didn't get any of your information. If there's a good website, and maybe you want to get those emails in the future, consider using your actual real email afterwards. And of course, review privacy policies. I know many of us, or practically all of us, are guilty of not actually reading the terms of service and the privacy policies, but it is actually by law that many of these companies are forced to show and provide and say what information that they are taking from their users, whether that is like their age, their health metrics, or possibly how often are they viewing them. And so that should be in the privacy policies, and you can look in that before you even opt in to use a product. And of course, limit sharing sensitive personal information. I think this kind of goes in with the review privacy policies, as well as the disposable email addresses. Say, for example, you order pizza from a pizza restaurant, and they're asking for like whenever you create an account, like they might ask for like your first name and your last name, but maybe the last name's not even important or even necessary. So don't even enter that in if you don't want to, or possibly your phone number. You're just gonna order it using your email address. I mean, why is the phone number needed? So maybe don't even have the phone number, or even use a pseudonym or an alias. Like just have a different name for you, and you can even put that in as the information, and that's just another layer of security because it'll be just that much harder for an adversary to track you. And then, of course, don't ever rely on regulations. Stay educated as much as possible on security trends and how to keep yourself safe, because as you've seen in the 23andMe, they actually shifted blame to the customers, and you couldn't really rely on these regulations. I think there should be regulations because it's hard for the layman to know everything that's going on. I mean, that's the whole point of regulations is to protect the layman. But unfortunately, like again, as you see in the 23andMe, didn't even do that. They shifted the blame. And just any little tip you can use here, I highly recommend it. It's just an extra layer of security, and the whole goal is just have extra layers, more and more layers, to hopefully deter an adversary or a hacker to even try to hack you in the first place. And I just want to finally say thank you so much for this class. It was a great final project. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's a great short class. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and hope you have a great day.